Get started. It's nice to have everybody on. Thanks for joining us. My name is Sean Brown. I'm a director on the board of the MIT Sloan Boston Alumni Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 88th Career Series session on developing others and ourselves with Keystone's Bob Hewes. We launched our Career Series back in 2009, which makes sense given that we're almost on 90 events now, in partnership with Keystone Partners, Boston's leading executive coaching and career transition firm. And we did so to support the career advancement and development of our Boston area alumni. Our nearly 90 events have featured a wide range of speakers from Keystone, from MIT professors, MIT and MIT Sloan alumni, and others. And it's been a real pleasure to share best practices on this important topic. During tonight's session, Keystone Senior Partner Bob Hewes will take us through how to be better executive coaches to our teams and to ourselves. And he'll also share some concrete approaches on creating goals and how to translate those into actions. And one of the things I'm most interested in is how to squeeze this all into what are already very busy days. So before we begin, I just want to share a couple quick tips on how to make the most of your Zoom console. We are using Zoom Webinar. First thing is, depending on how many screens you're looking at, in the upper right side of your screen, you'll see a button for speaker view versus gallery view. If you go to speaker view, then you'll just see the feed of the active speaker, which would be me at this point. If you go to gallery view, you'll see both Bob and myself all the time. At any time during the presentation, we encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A panel. I will jump in as appropriate with questions as Bob presents, and I'll be reviewing your questions throughout the session. And so please do share those at any time, and looking forward to a great discussion today. If you have any technical issues or need assistance, you should also use the Q&A panel there. And Tina Krasinski will be able to help you. We are recording today's session, and we're also going to make the recording and slides available to everybody after the session. So now I'd like to introduce Bob. We've been really lucky to have Bob as a frequent flyer with us. I was going through as I was preparing my remarks to try and see how many times he'd presented to our group out of those 90. And I would say that it's been at least 8, maybe as many as 10 times. So Bob's a senior partner at Keystone. He's focused on leadership development, and he's been an executive coach at Keystone for over 15 years and a management consultant for 25. Bob's also the practice head for group leadership development at Keystone, and he holds a master's and PhD from that other institution up the river that also uses RED. And he has a master's and bachelor's from the University of New Hampshire. Bob, it's my pleasure to welcome you and to turn things over to you. Thanks again for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sean, for that great introduction. You always do a good job with that. Well, hello, everybody. And for those that I've known by doing this for a number of years, it's really good to be with you. And for those that are new, it's good to have the acquaintance. And, you know, it's funny, this virtual setup is going to allow us to do a few things that we otherwise can't do. Sean was mentioning that, you know, use the chat or the question. You can chat to just us or the whole group. Let's really take advantage of that this evening, where you can share examples, ideas, and even questions through this. So this is a really good topic. You know, I was thinking about this. Let me set it up for us and talk about what we're going to go through. This idea of development, this is all we do all day long, if you can believe that. And what we get to do tonight is to talk through, and this is what I really hope for you, is to give you a few of the key ideas that we're using in the field with clients every day. And we want to step back and look at some of the methodology, the process, the approach, even a little bit of philosophy in here. And you'll see this basically applies to any particular capability that you want to develop. And so I think you could use this on almost virtually anything. So here's what we'll go through to really set this up. I'm going to start with the big picture, this critical idea of defining leadership and management in your organization's context. Another thing is we'll go over a few little development principles. These are some of the tried and true things that we've done over time. And then I'm going to hit right to the title. Those first two things apply to whether we're developing ourselves or others, but then we'll hit each one individually, and I'll give you some key things. Like Sean said, this is a good informal group. We've got some good formal ideas for you. We'll go to, a little past 7:15, 7:20 on the presentation, and with plenty of time for questions. But along the way, you can ask any questions that you want. So Sean mentioned this. I do think it's important, a little context of who we are so you know where this is coming from. As he said, I'm from Keystone, and we're a career management firm. Two of these columns, the left and right, it's all about transition. It's people that are in transition. We have wonderful consultants that work with people in that. That's when you're outside of a firm. My division, leadership development, is that center column, and that's where we're working with people that are inside an organization. And our idea is it's really to serve as a catalyst. This is kind of our driving force. It's really helping each individual leader and manager be the most effective they can be and be able to leverage that so their businesses and organizations are successful. But that's where all this work is coming from. So when we think about this, I want to set something up for you. Sean mentioned this, that everyone's busy, quite busy nowadays. So look, as leaders and managers, we've got to hit results. And in order to do that, you really need to get the most out of your people. Now, one of the tricks is to get the most out of your people, we really need to develop ourselves and them. Like, we always need to be learning, being able to do more. I think the trick is that this is an important activity, but those daily demands, even some of us are feeling pressure from our current to-do list or email inbox, it's always getting pushed out. And I love this, we should all know this important urgency matrix or that dichotomy. So my real hope on this that I set up at the beginning is to give you some things that you can work it in so it really becomes an ongoing practice. It's kind of real time coaching. This is the challenge that we face though, because this is important. It's not urgent with things. So let's hit I'm going to dive right in. Let's hit this first topic of defining leadership. I call this the definition of leadership when I'm at a client. Here's what I mean by this, that we really need to get at is within your own organization's context, we need to define what does leading and managing look like. And here's an interesting thing. Of course, everyone that went through Sloan has the bedrock theory. You can pick almost any capability you want: strategic thinking, developing people, teaming, communication. There obviously are some very standard ideas and approaches that cut across any of our organizations. But there's another whole part of what does it mean there. I won't say it's always unique, but it's particular. And what we've got to get good at doing is we need to be able to describe that. You need to articulate it. In essence, I'm saying define it, get it written down, and have some examples. In essence, what we're trying to do is really get so that we can be good at saying just what does it mean to be a leader at your organization. And what's funny, this is one of those, I think this is a very straightforward idea, but I can't tell you how many times it has skipped. And people just kind of go by this and they'll just say so-and-so needs to do X better, like they need to delegate better. But they won't always do a good job of describing, well, what does really good delegation look at our place? Let me give you an example of this. So here's one: effective communication. Now, to be honest, all of us could have this as a development goal. Every organization could communicate better. There's no doubt about it. But take a look at these first three bullets on this. This is one that's modified from a client that I work with. And they say, be proactive with your communication, up, down, and across. Look for what needs to be communicated. Listen as much as you tell. Look at that already. There's already this flavor that the communication should be very active. And this phrase, up, down, and across, this is something that has now lived with them for over 10 years. But that's the kind of language that we're trying to get at and need to get at. So that's the idea when I say define it, articulate it, this idea here of You want to get it so you have some phrases like that, up, down, and across. Now that's like a shorthand there. And if we can get really good at doing that across a number of capabilities, it makes it easier to develop. In essence, we're talking about setting the target here, or this is the meta goal of development. Now, some organizations have done really good work on that. You may have a set of values, like you saw, we had a mission statement. If you look, we have our own bit of a capability model that does define some of those for our organization. But if you're going to develop, we need to get it in your context. The other thing is, when I look at, say, this one or another one like decision making, what does it mean in your organization? I have one client, they use the phrase bias to action. There's another one that says we're data driven with our decision making. The two are similar and related, but they have those own phrases that they're using. And that's an example of really having it be articulated. So if we get that, that's kind of that big picture. What we need to do now is let's take it down another level. Let's look at some development principles. And as I was saying, these are things that are cutting across. And I love number one here about take ownership. And I think everybody on this call is a leader. And this is something that you can really help with, and we can be much better at doing. There's a weird psychology that happens a little bit where people are waiting to be developed. And you can understand it. There are programs and organizations, but I'll often hear, if my manager would only do this, why doesn't the organization do X? In this day and age, we all need to be very empowered on this. We need to take ownership of our own development. Even if it's defining what decision-making looks like, you can do that in your corner of the world in your organization. Another one here is being very intentional, conscious, and explicit. I was thinking about this. If I had to pick the highest frequency word in coaching, it's probably intention in all its various variations, like being intentional, start with an intention. This is the idea of what are you trying to do, having good goals, and I'll get to that in a second, but being intentional, being very aware, having it be conscious, and then be explicit with moves that you are making. So that idea, if you combine that with empowerment, we're starting to get a good theme. Then a couple of core things here is you should seek self-awareness, whether that's feedback, some style work. What I really like here is the word seek. We really should be, just like goal one here, or principle one, we should be empowered and we should be seeking this so that we can do this next one. I'm kind of a balanced executive coach. We're a balanced firm. We believe you should harness and leverage your strengths, and you should know and address challenges. I don't believe just in playing to strengths, and I don't believe just always look at what's the problem. But we should really know what it is so that you can be as effective as possible by leveraging those strengths and how they're coming across to others. Also, knowing if I've got some challenges that I need to tackle, get your arms around those and do it. Another good one, I love this phrase, develop a range of managerial approaches, managerial leadership approaches. So we're not just one-trick ponies here. Situations require different approaches. And here's what does make this, I'll say, exciting and challenging. A situation needs certain forms of leading and management, but we all come with certain strengths. Sometimes it works great in a situation. Other times I need to work really hard at it and I need to develop in a different way. The last two here, very important. You got to write this stuff down. Just like I was saying, articulate what leadership means in your context. Here, it's about get plans, your goals written down. You know, there's research in other fields, certainly in the wellness area, that people that write things down, they achieve their goals, you know, roughly on the order of 50% more often. It's that same type of idea, and it keeps you accountable. And then I thought for people that are Sloan alums, you would love the real estate riff of location, location, location. If you really want to do something, you need to practice, practice, practice it. There is no doubt about that. So those are our principles. So you think we've kind of got that top of a definition, principles. Now let's talk about an approach. This is a very straightforward way to implement. So you've got to understand your organization's context. We got to reflect and let me get my style awareness, my feedback. What should my goals be? You've got to write it down and then put that plan into implementation through practice. So I kind of look at this: assess, action plan, and implement. It sounds very easy at that level. The trick is, what do you do under each one? And I think this is a good spot we can look at. Well, let's lift the hood on that. And let's start now with the self. You're going to see this actually applies to others as well, but let's take each of these three parts just one at a time. So on assessment, we think of that as coaches, we look at two primary things, plus there's obviously a third. You always have to understand the business, the objectives, and the strategy. We don't do any of that, any coaching in a vacuum. We're just taking that as given. That's a big given, but we're taking it as given. So there's the whole style side of this. And I'm sure, again, everyone here has done some version of a DISC or a Myers-Briggs type indicator or a Hogan. There are all these different ones. What I would say, one of the best ways to really work on your development is do some of this work formally. It will give you great insights and you can see where to apply it. That's on the self or the style side. The other one that is crucial is you got to get some feedback. And there's a line that I have here: how do you show up? One of my colleagues said that, and I think it is a brilliant line. We all think we show up a certain way. The question is, how are you actually showing up to others? And if you haven't done this, it is so valuable to understand, I think I'm trying to do X, but it's coming across as Y and Z. Or as I like to say to some people, I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z, and it's coming across as A, B, and C. In other words, it can be a big gap. What it will actually show you, though, is where you're lined up and where you're not. And I think, like any of us, it may be a little painful, but that's get a good coach. Work with someone you trust. Knowing what the gap is and then doing something, that's the critical thing to be able to do. That's what we want to make sure. Yeah.
We've had a couple of questions come in. One, and you know, the context for our career series has often been folks who were changing careers. So you talk about the importance of understanding your organization and its values. How do you work with clients who are also thinking about a change? And how much of that, the way one would think about that change, would drive them going to an organization maybe that has different values? So where do you start? Do you start with your organization's values? Do you start with your own when you think about that style assessment? And I'm going to give a concrete example. You know, some organizations are highly collaborative and are more team-based in their approach to, you know, getting things done. And some are very individualistic and they might have sharp elbows, right? So how do you sort of figure that out in the context of you're currently employed, you're thinking about how do you advance and develop? So have you had any situations like that with clients that you could take us through?
I'd say that comes up a lot. So there are a couple of things, and it's a really good question. So one, when we're working with a client, we're hired by an organization. We kind of have two, but then I also say have a coachee. We're working inside, and our job is to work with people inside. Now, sometimes people are thinking about leaving. This is a very delicate area, and we're very careful as coaches because we're hired by someone to work with organization. So, but what I'll say is, we'll say maximize what you can get. Let's really look at what you need to work on. And I've had some people, after they go through with coaching, they end up staying. A lot of my colleagues have that all the time. I still want to answer the question, though. Say you're in this, you're thinking of leaving or you have left. You're asking a really fundamental question. There are two parts of it. You should know what you really are looking for. And Sean, you gave a great example. Teamwork, is it a collaborative place or a sharp elbow place? You can think of all the other capabilities. Think of communication. Think of big picture thinking. Just think, what are they trying to do? You should get as good an understanding of what they're actually like compared to what you're looking for. Now, none of us get a perfect match, Every place has its plus and minuses, they all do, but you want to try to be as clear-eyed. What is it really like there? And what I'd say, one of the best things you can do is use your business school network to truly understand what a place is like. Even if it's a couple of degrees of separation, you may not know someone directly, but you probably through LinkedIn and other things can get pretty close. When we're interviewing an organization or us, we're all on our best behavior. What you want to know is, what's it like when we're under stress? Are they a sharp elbow place, and to what degree? In the end, you're going to have to weigh that. But these ideas of knowing what you're like and what a place is like, that's where it would apply. In coaching, though, we have to be very careful. We're working with people on the inside. It's a great question. Let's take a look. Next thing, since we're on goals,
Thanks.
let's look at this. Remember we said that assessment piece, now it's action planning. And so this is something we do with clients all the time. We got a little example there. We want to get it so if you had your action plan written down, only your name can go on it. So I want you to put enough detail that, imagine this, if your manager, I don't know, she has 6 direct reports and they happen to have 6 action plans. If you remove the name, could they put the names back in place? So as an example, if you're too high level and we all just say, like, look at this one, it's a communication skill plan. If we just said improve communication skill, I can't tell, is that Sean's or Bob's? There's no way to know. But if you started reading the bullets, you'd go, wait, that sounds like Sean's, or that sounds like Bob's there. You want to get it to that level that it has a good, here's what it is, here's why I'm doing it, and here's how I'm going to go about it. But we want to get your name on it. Then the next thing in here is practicing. And we said practice, practice, practice. So a couple of success factors, which includes practicing. But if you really want to do this is something I've been doing in our programs. Sean mentioned I head up our the group practice. You can't do this stuff once a month. If you're really going to tackle a new goal, you need to focus on it. You need to bake it into your weekly planning. You need to get it so that when you're doing the work, you're looking at how we're applying. Like we're just talking about communication skill, and say we were the up, down, and across organization. I might be thinking, I haven't done across in a while. What peer or who are the peers that I need to communicate with? This last one, keeping a log. This may sound a little funny, but I have had CEOs do this. This is akin to writing your plan down. If you keep a log, and you can do this, there's some people that take this to the nth degree. They have an app on it. They're journaling. It's almost like they're writing a blog about it. I'm not suggesting that. It's your own choice. But if you at least document some key events and what you're doing, you then have a basis to reflect on. I also think this is critical now. Most of us don't remember what we did on Monday of this week. So when you go to reflect in a weekly planning session with yourself, you won't remember what you did. Whereas if you have this little log, it helps. I see this on clients. I can cleave my personal client set into 2 groups. Those that do this, the things illustrated here, versus those that don't. The ones that do it are much more successful on what they're trying to achieve. There's just no doubt about it. So let's do this. Let's look at developing others. So we've talked about this on developing self, have a good target, assessment, goals, get it. And I hope you saw it, got to write it down, and then really putting things in place. When we shift it to developing others, we need to actually do everything we just talked about, plus some other things. The real thing here is our job is to bring out the best of the people that we have. And we need to shift our focus from just what I'm doing to what they or what we are doing. I had a doctor that I was coaching once that headed up an entire unit. He said he had someone say to him once, when you're ready to be chair of a department in a medical facility, it's when you're no longer worried about your own success. And I thought that is just a brilliant way to think about it. You need to really focus in and be able to understand what they're about, what you're looking for from them, and really taking an interest in that part. So let's go through a couple of things on this. First, let's do a little chat here. Let's get some examples. I find these really help when you have your own examples. Chat in some examples, or just an example of a time that stands out when you were developed. It could be something like, my boss gave great stretch assignments. Or another one is, my boss actually talked about development with us or me. Another one is, my boss would point out key points in our work to really pay attention to. So take a few minutes, chat in a couple to Sean, and let's see what we can actually get from this. And as we're doing that, oh, go ahead, Sean.
I got another question in, which is probably a situation that you've seen with some of your clients. What do you do when the person you report to is either not particularly interested in your development or not particularly skilled at helping you drive your development? Do you look at, like, how have you worked with clients to look either elsewhere within their organization or outside? Maybe to a coach, or maybe to, other colleagues, or a personal cabinet, or whatever it is that you've got as a resource.
So those are actually great ones on that. It's a very good question, because we run across this actually all the time. And I think a good thing, this goes to our first principle, which I think the person asking this is looking for this, is they're going to take ownership of their development. That's what you need to do. What I would say is, work with your manager in the best way possible. If you really are just not getting anything, this is why you need to own it. One is, know exactly what your organization has, maybe through HR. Sometimes there are places that do have good programs. There are some resources on this. I'll take a very direct approach. You probably have a good sense of capabilities that you should work on. We've been naming a few here: decision-making, communications, whatever they are. I would say, get some good feedback on that so you know where you stand. And you can do that through just some inquiry with your boss and others. Maybe you have a formal feedback program, but basically put a plan together yourself and look into the work where you can do it. Then we can do those other things. One is, the internet's a wonderful thing on here. You can do, if you start Googling any capability, you'll get overwhelmed, but you can look at what Sloan has. Other business schools have great publications on this that I personally use as well. You can get some outside resources, including maybe a coach, maybe a mentor, maybe that board of people, some close people that you will talk with on your development. What I'd say, though, is you can work on it regardless of where your boss is on it. It won't be as easy and it won't feel as validating, but I still want people to work on their development regardless of where the boss is.
Awesome. So Bob, we do have a couple. The first one was, the manager recognized what I was good at when I didn't even know myself. And that is that part of the self-awareness piece where you can actually gain some from, your manager who's helping you develop this. The next one was very interesting. It was how the boss helped this person think about creating a presentation so that the listener, the CEO, would listen rather than, I assume, the presenter just sort of presenting. They use the word vomiting, of, I guess, spewing up facts, and it changed how this person thought about communication. And then the third one is more, how does one prioritize one's own development in a startup environment where there's just not a lot of resources dedicated to thinking about how people are developing, and there's much more about how just you're getting through your checklist, because you just have to get as much done as possible because you're very lightly resourced.
Those are great. I love that. What was the first chat one? What did the boss do?
The manager recognized what I was good at when I didn't even know myself, and was right.
So that these are great. what we want to do when you're thinking of developing others, we should all take heed of this. People are going to relay stories, what they learn from you or not, right? And I like that one. Before I knew, I have one, it was close to that presentation one, and we'll hit that startup question in a second. I remember one, it was either 94 or 95. This is a long time ago. We had a presentation, and a founding partner in a firm of mine, we moved in and he goes, this is the kind of insight we want to bring to a client. Forever, I mean, look, it's almost 30 years later and I'm recounting that. So think of what you're doing that is going to really impact people, because these are the kind of things that we remember and we use. Now let's go to that startup one. So, and I love the context, because you'd say, how do I prioritize? And this actually goes back, you would never talk about coaching without the context. What I would say here, I'm going to be very focused and bottom line with this thought. Look at the capabilities that are needed, like even in your checklist, if you will, stepping back, what is it we need? For instance, is it speed in decision making? Is it we're trying to dig deeper in analysis, or is there a communication thing? Whatever that thing is, go right back to our very first topic tonight. Define it and get at what does good look like in this startup context. And I also think you can go out and get some resources, even just a few articles on something, and go to your trusted resources. You know, what a Sloan review produces. This is where I think business school reviews, and I won't mention that one up the river there, but that's another good one that I do use. Looking at a few of those things, you can get some good ideas. So you're not flying without a framework or a theory, but in the startup, I would just pick, you know, 2, maybe 3 capabilities that you work on, put a mock plan together, work on it as you're working through that checklist. There's no reason to wait, but I would bottom line it as a startup. All right, let's hit a few more ideas.
Thank you.
This is really great, Sean. This is what I think is fun in this environment versus if we were actually together, that we'll hopefully do that someday. So I want to give you
we had one more that came in a lot. It was a manager who was a former U.S. military member that told about his experience and not to focus on mistakes, just to support each other and solve it together. Because if you're in a war, if you're not together, you lose more than a battle. It seemed like a nice thing to share.
Yeah, what a good example. And think there's a little bit of a mantra or philosophy in that. And think this is what we need to set too. It's like work together when we're under fire. Now, what a phrase there. And what I'm suggesting here is not that we lift and use that, but you need to have your own, whatever that is, like work the problem. Let's get in there, figure out what we need to change on that. We each should be having that, because that is actually a key way of developing others. People hang on to these things. I think this is a good point. Let me give you a couple of ideas on the developing out of others. If we think, how do we make this successful? You got to make it an ongoing process. This is not an annual review or biannual. You know, if we're doing it twice, semi-annual. Biannual would be really bad. We want it semi-annual. Twice a year is better. It should really be a real-time thing. If you've got goals, people are working on things, they're coming up all the time. You make it ongoing. I'll call this real-time development. Another idea, you know, I've said this a bit, is you've got to tune in to what it is that they need. And this is, I have a little bit of a teaching philosophy. We obviously have to do some things where Sean and I, we're just presenting tonight, we're getting ideas out. If we're really developing, you need to know where they are and figure out their challenges and what they need. In other words, say, well, let's take that communicating up. Maybe some of us, we need to communicate with senior management. We had that CEO presentation example. If we all needed to do that, I guarantee we're all going to need a little bit of a customized approach, because what I need to do, what Sean needs to do, they're actually different things. And you can't just drive it by how you did it. You need to know where they are. This is a really tough one for some people. The other thing is go the right way on the slides is the first thing. But the other thing is use the work itself to capitalize for areas to work on. What I like to say, we'll follow the military theme. Work is a target-rich environment for development when you start looking. So in other words, you can give me virtually, and I'll say virtually, if we tried to trip us up, I'm sure we could, but almost any goal you give me, I can find an element on a given assignment. It may not be perfect, but if I know somebody wants more analysis, and we're doing something that is a very, say, qualitative interviews, I bet there's a little spreadsheet we could use, and there's some work that they could push on it to do a little better. But these are like process ideas across. And what I think I'm going to do, let's go to another. Sean, tell me, we're getting good questions. When would you like the formal presentation to end? I'll land on whatever time you tell me.
You're going to stick the landing, huh? I've got like another 2 in queue. So I would say if we could take another 10 to 15, I think we're good. I think we're good. I know that folks want to make sure that we cover this material. And as I said at the beginning, we will be sharing these slides and the recording, so you don't have to take furious notes, but we really do want more questions. And this is meant to be a conversation. We're very lucky to have this time with Bob. So back to you, Bob.
Okay, great. That's great. So let me go. Here's another thing. This is on the theme of really know where people are. This is a bit of a self-awareness thing too, are you working with someone that it's through the head, the heart, or the gut? What works better with them so that you can understand and you can basically, this is another way, know your audience when it's an audience of one, so that you're getting examples, ideas, discussion, working in a way that really fits their learning style and approach. I have somebody, they love stories. You give them a story, I swear they could walk to the moon with it. There are other people, they want concrete examples. And here's what's interesting. If you give a story to the concrete example person, it doesn't work, and actually vice versa. So you've really got to know what your people need to do the best learning. Another good one, so here's a goal one. You said, Sean, we got to get some key points out. This is it. So in the develop self, we had this plan idea. It's the same thing here. One, though, there's an element of you got to step back and think of this. I've got 4 parts here. What are the people capabilities needed for your area? What are we doing short term, long term? What is it we need? Is it more analytic capability? Is it more this, that? What is it? And then think of each individual. Where are they? What are the strengths, challenges? What do they need to work on? And then create a keyword warning, keyword, shared joint development plan. Come up with a plan based on those goals that they're talking with you too about, so that it really is a shared plan. This cannot be top down. It also can't be bottom up. It has to be kind of met in the middle. I mean, you still are the boss. You need to set what people are doing, but you got to give them a lot of freedom with it. Here's the 4th part that gets missed a lot. This is my target-rich environment. I see this happen all the time. I'll see a beautiful plan, but then people are really left on their own. Now, back to our earlier question, if you got a boss not doing this, it may be hard, but I'll give you a way we could do it. Help them implement and execute their plans. Find the ways when it comes up. Like there could be an upcoming meeting, they're trying to do something. So instead of you, quote, doing all the presentation, maybe you give it to them. You got to be smart about it. Don't put it in a high-risk situation. But let's go to that boss one, very challenging. So I got a boss, not into development, but I've got a plan that I've put together. But that person, she wasn't really into it, doing it with me to look at it. What you could do, though, is through some good inquiry or some good thought about the work you have coming up, you could ask, how would you go about this thing? You've done this before. Tell me what you've done. You could pursue that area. You could get them to react to what you're going to do. hey, I'm thinking of this. Or maybe you get some feedback after you've done it. There are a number of ways that you can get a little bit out, you can get a little bit of blood out of that stone, which would help you quite a bit with things. So that's one, shared development plans together, as formal as you can, because I believe in it in writing. Here's another one. This idea that we were saying, use the work, good phrase, delegating for development. And if you can tackle this one, it's great. So we've got a couple of parts here. Find the opportunities. What I find, if you're a leader that's really into this, you start looking for that. So I had that staff member that wanted client contact. I have many more degrees of freedom to get that person client contact than they do. I need to be looking for it. So I have to be an active finder in this. And then use it. When I delegate something, incorporate what they're looking for. I call this the lens. So you think of this when you're looking at your work world, it's like plate glass if there's no lens. All the light comes through, there's no bending of anything. If I know the development goals that somebody has, all of a sudden, it's now a lens. It's not plate glass. That light is coming through in different colors. It's getting bent. You can find opportunities in many assignments that you'd normally just delegate. You put this other thing. Then, of course, you got to, how did it go? You got to monitor it and maybe discuss and have some feedback. But if you can shift your delegating to delegating for development where appropriate, that's a great way to do it. Last concept.
Hey, Bob, one question that came in about delegating is, what if you've got somebody who's already overwhelmed, right? And this could touch on that startup question that came earlier as well. So if you're looking to delegate, sometimes you also have to balance the scale, right? So if you're going to give them a couple things, how do you think about what to take away? And are the things that you take away the ones that they're already really good at? Because then maybe they're not building on their strengths. So if you could just talk a little bit about the sort of whole person that you're thinking about as you consider this delegation opportunity.
Let's call this the Rubik's Cube of delegation. We got a bunch of things going on. It's a really good example. And, I'm going to start with maybe a high-end thing. Say that case is going on. Wouldn't it be wonderful if what we did is, let's have a conversation directly together on that? An element that Sean mentioned about, well, maybe we should juggle some of the things. Instead of me doing it in a vacuum, it would be great to talk with the person, because what you don't want is if I pull something, then they start worrying, wait a minute, why did he pull this? What's going on? We want to have it be really clear. Hey, we've got a development opportunity. Let's look at what you have. Let's be smart about it. So if we could go that way, it would be great. Another thing might be is, this is a little meta, maybe being overwhelmed and working with it, that's part of a goal. Like, how do we do that? You could actually model some good things. The first thing is, don't just keep piling things on. That's like the worst thing. Maybe this is an element of development we can do. It's like when we asked for those chat examples, we should be modeling these things we're talking about to our absolute best. So somebody's overwhelmed, we got a lot on our plate. What would you do? How would you want it done with you? Let's do it with them. Because if they could not only not be overwhelmed, but actually learn some good prioritization and how do we do this, that's now we got a twofer going on. Because when it's overwhelmed, we would actually want to diagnose that. Maybe what's happening is they're saying yes to everything and no to nothing. Maybe it's a case of I've got scope creep all over the place. So I say yes and no enough, but what happens is I take on a task that somebody was intending to be 5 minutes and I'm turning it into 5 hours. Another thing, maybe I'm having trouble closing things off. I got a checklist, but it only grows. There's something else going on that if we're really thinking about development, we'd want to diagnose first and really understand it. It's a great area. Great area. Sean, I got one more content piece. Can we hit that? And then you
Definitely.
okay, and then you can feel we've hit all the content pieces. So I actually want to stop there. It's feedback. I'm gonna make a plea to this group. Feedback is critical because we don't have good senses of where we are. What my plea to this group is, I'm on a mission here. We need to get better at both giving and receiving feedback. It can be tough. A lot of us don't like it. It's awkward. It's conflict. But if you make this very regular and we just change it up a little bit to have it kind of task driven, this is important. I want to land on one. We'll make this, I got one slide here to talk about. So just think of this. Given it's Sloan, let's start with a nice theory. I've got some job to do. There's an expected performance, but then reality hits. There's a range of outcomes. I could be right on target. I could exceed it. I could hit above performance, or I'm below. What we want to do is not just have it sit with no feedback. If somebody's, and this is interesting, people talk, research after research shows people don't get enough feedback. And an interesting thing we should remember, they want the feedback. They don't want cheerleading. I'm taking away from if we're trying to be motivational, but in the feedback, what they're actually asking for is honest feedback. We should remember two parts of this. Reinforce the stuff you're looking for. We should take this from, actually the military does this, but sports definitely does this. When they run a play well, they actually say, that is a great play. That's how we want to run it. We should be doing the same thing. Someone gives a great presentation or part of a presentation, look for what you can reinforce specific comments. The same thing applies if I'm off on a part of it, be able to talk with me about what you're seeing and what you're really looking for. The worst thing you can do is if you ask someone to do something, they do it, it comes back to you, it's not right, but you say okay. Because what is their takeaway? It's okay. You didn't say anything. And here's the big idea I want to leave with you. So funny, you'd say, what the heck is this diagram? And this is the last piece, Sean. So there's a little exercise. There used to be this thing called getting together in meetings. Some society used to do that about 6 months ago. At some point, we'll maybe get back to that. We had this little feedback exercise that we would run where one person literally was throwing crumpled paper into a basket and somebody would give them feedback. Here's what's incredible. I've done this dozens of times with hundreds of people. What never happens is asking what feedback does the person need or what is it that they see. We go right into a telling mode. So when you're giving feedback as a part of your feedback, when we're back in this world, remember to ask, and this is my phrase, come up with your own, ask what they're seeing. What are the best things? You're going to talk to somebody about a presentation, or we can pick whatever task you want. Customer interface, projects, whatever it is. How is it going? What do you think's working? What do you think you need to focus on? Asking what they see can do two brilliant things. One is they often will pick out the things that you think they need to work on, which now the door is open. It's opened up wide to be able to do that. The other is you may pick up context that will change your feedback. Like I had one today, this is a great thing. Somebody was thinking that somebody was very late on their decision making. What it turned out is there was another part of a process that was taking 2 to 4 weeks to get done. Now, the client does need to do something better, communicate. When they were getting feedback on decision making, turns out they were making decisions in under 24 hours. There was just information they had to wait to get that was taking 2 weeks to get. So to the outside world, you appear slow on decision making. But when you ask what do they see and they reveal this, all of a sudden it changes. The feedback went from decision making to communicating. So and I think, Sean, that's a great spot. this is such a fundamental idea. Maybe ask a few more questions, and I know we promised people would be able to eat on time.
So I think this feedback thing is something that struck a nerve. We've got a couple questions just around how do you get started? So specifically, you just advocated for as the person giving, so, giver and receiver, as the giver of feedback, can you share a couple of phrases or things that you recommend to your clients when they're trying to develop their people and asking their people how they would like to receive feedback and what they'd like to receive it on? So you know what I mean? So, you're meeting with somebody that reports to you. You want to give them the feedback. You want to give them good feedback, but at the same time, you want to give it to them the way they sort of want and perceive it.
Okay. That's a great question. So one thing is we probably should back up a couple of steps because it will really help. One of the best things, whatever this job is, we got to be good and clear on whatever it is. And I'm going to say, let's assume that was done. But in my coaching experience, at least a third of the time, it turns out the direction wasn't clear. We need to be better on that. It's a separate issue, but let's assume, hey, that was clear. A really good thing before you even do your first feedback is you set the stage and you say, hey, you're doing this new thing. It's great. You want to take this on. As you work through it, let's have some regular feedback sessions. That one thing all of a sudden sets up the expectation. So when, say, a meeting is done, let's make this easy. They're working on how they're running meetings, right? They've got these contentious project reviews. We got to get better at it. Great. You've already set it up that, hey, after the next 4 of those, let's do a debrief right after. What works and what doesn't. And now when we're doing this, I'm going to give you my idea. See, I'm already setting the stage because as the boss, one rule of management, bosses do get to make rules. That's a clear thing, okay? You ask right then, you say, as we're doing this, what kind of feedback helps you the most? What are the things that work with you? Examples, what is it? And then stop. Just listen to what they say. You might be surprised what you'll hear. I've had people say real good examples of what worked and didn't in the meeting would help. I've had other people say, please don't sugarcoat. Just tell me what didn't work. Total surprise, but that's what they asked for. The thing is, by setting this up, when we now have a meeting and then we sit, we get on a video call and let's say, hey, let's go through this. Remember, we're going to do this like 4 times. Let's go through, what do you think worked? Let me go through what I think, and then let's come up with ideas on it. You've set the stage that it should now be pretty easy, or easier, maybe it's never easy, easier to do it. That's some things that you can do as a way to get started. The other, just to add in, Sean, one more is, this is really clear, myself on this too. If you practice doing this, it gets a lot easier like the 12th time you've done it. I remember giving a talk once and it was like, well, this is going to be a hard one, but we had to do it repetitively. It was amazing. By the 6th time, there was no more nervousness about it. We were just doing it. Feedback is clearly that way. What I would challenge is actually get to a place like for the next 6 weeks, 2 times a week, you're giving some feedback. Just do it. You'll be better for it.
And so the flip side to this, and this will be our last question, unless somebody squeezes in another one while I'm asking this one, is how does it go the other way? In other words, if you're the leader and you're offering to give feedback, but you're asking the person that's receiving how they want to receive it, is that also a good opportunity to sort of ask for upward feedback, or do you recommend separate sessions?
That's okay. That's a thoughtful question. First, the idea that you're asking for upward feedback, what a great way to model it. Because if we're asking people to listen to feedback, we should too. And this is a tricky thing because, as a leader, we have authority. We want an example. Whether you make it separate or not, this is one of those. Here's our classic consulting answer to many questions. It depends. What I would say is it's really driven by the situation. So depending on the topic, depending on the person, the relationship, it may fit in very well. What I would want to say is don't detract any time from them. And that could easily happen.
Okay.
Let's make sure we keep the focus on developing them. Now, along the way, maybe you could get it. If you're really concerned, I would just do it very informally at the end or as a quick separate section. Don't make it, or don't allow it to take over the time from them.
And so maybe you do set up the separate section. If they've got a lot to say, say, look, I really want to hear this stuff, but I don't want to take any more away from you. And so there was one more that came in, which was, what do you do when you're trying to develop others and the person just doesn't want to hear it?
So,
how do you get their attention in a nice way to share feedback when they don't want to hear it? They think they're doing a great job.
Yeah. So, it's what we've never heard of this problem. That's never happened. No, that's a great. Unfortunately, that happens probably more often, but it also goes, it's a really good, serious question. It does go back to the way that you set it up. And, someone said being nice, it's interesting. I don't want to be mean on this. We probably need to be firm with things. One is take a look at what's going on. If the way that this was described, it's literally set up, and this is a perfect time for that picture. If we're on the bottom track here, they're really missing it. You've got to look to have maybe a series of discussions. And what I'd say is they implied what's a way to be a little nice is maybe you do it through a little bit of escalation, right? Maybe at first it's, hey, let's talk about this, looking for X, kind of got Y, what could you do? And they keep dodging it. So what I might do is I might plant the seed and say, hey, we're going to, on the next one on this, I want you to really make it come out as Y, not X. So when it comes out, and again, we're back to X, say, hey, from the setup, do you think this is Y or X? I'd go a little Socrates here. I might ask them questions. What are they seeing in it? Then if they're still not getting it, now we escalate a little bit, because one thing that can help, you've got to really understand what does motivate this person too. Like, do they excel in their job? Are they motivated by challenge? Is this a temporary position? A lot of us really do want to do well. If we've had a little bit of a pattern, meaning we've talked twice on this or 3 times, now as the boss, you can step back and say, hang on, we need to escalate this a bit. This is our 3rd discussion on trying to hit X or trying to hit Y, and you keep doing X. That can get attention with it. Now look, there is a bigger calculus here. If you're doing all these things and we're not going anywhere, there is a formal approach, an HR, personal improvement plan, like a PEP. That's a very formal thing. What I say is normal leaders and managers, we kind of work in the boundaries. There's a lot of space. You want to try several things before we get to a formal, I've taken notes, we've written it down thing to see if you can move it. Unfortunately, some people only respond when it's a formal warning. I hope we have, through this, there are a number of degrees of freedom that you can try on this. And I'll leave you with this last example in there. And Sean, if we get a few more, we can keep going. I had a CEO that was struggling with this with a direct report. And you could go, wait, it's a CEO? And why, can't they just order the person? Well, this was a difference of vision. They had a couple of those conversations, and they found the question that changed everything on this. The person said, if you were CEO and you were dealing with this, what would you do right now? the person just sat back and realized they'd now kind of gone over a line, and they got at what the issue is, and that allowed them to move on. So the CEO basically turned the tables to get, before using the actual stick, they use that method of inquiry, and that turned that one around.
And the question was asked in the context of, if you were the CEO and you had somebody like you reporting to you, was that the context?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. If you had somebody you've been asking them several times and they kept dodging and, arguing, what would you do in this situation? That caught the person's attention.
Thank you. Bob, thank you so much on behalf of our attendees and the MIT Sloan Boston Alumni Association. Really appreciate you taking your time with us tonight. Normally I give you a gift, but instead you're just going to have to take our virtual thanks via a virtual gift. And I want to thank everybody who attended tonight, all the great questions and the chats. Thanks for participating. We've got some other great virtual events coming up. On November 4th, we have our monthly Women and Wine Wednesdays virtual happy hour. And then on the 19th and 20th of November, our virtual MIT CFO Summit on navigating the new. Now, normally at this time of year, I'd be doing a big push for our holiday party. Unfortunately, we have not made plans for a holiday party this year, given the current context, but we have been in discussions about potentially a spring or summer party that's like sort of holiday party delayed. So we'll keep an eye on that, and we're going to keep sharing with you this great content from our friends at Keystone. So Bob, thanks again. Thank you all. We would appreciate your feedback. You'll have the opportunity to share your feedback via a survey that'll come up at the end of this, when you close out your event console. And Bob, thank you again, and thank you all to everybody who joined us. Hope you all have a great night.
Right, Sean, that was terrific interaction. Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.